Grandmother Bee and I are making this tape for Tyler. She's here in Albuquerque, and this is October the 29th, 1990. Mother, what kinds of things did you want Tyler to know about Fanny?
Well, Fanny was the first animal we had when we moved on the farm. I lived in a big city, St. Louis, Missouri, and I had gone to kindergarten there and was in the first grade. School starts in September, and in November we moved to Grandpa's farm. My grandpa lived in Kansas City. He was retired, and he'd built a big brick house in Kansas City, and he had a stable in the back of the lot, and he had a driving horse, because cars were not, people didn't have automobiles in those days. So when we'd go to visit, he'd hitch her up to the surrey. It was one with the fringe on the top, and we would ride around through the city and through the parks, and that was the way we spent Sunday afternoon with him. He always wanted some of his boys, to live on the farm. My father was the second oldest boy, and they talked it over and decided it would be a good place for the girls to live. And we moved to the farm. And the first animal we got was Fanny. Fanny was a driving horse. She was very fast. She had racing blood in her, but she couldn't race professionally. One hip was higher than the other. We don't know exactly why, whether she was born that way, whether it was injured afterwards, or just why she had that. It didn't slow her down. She never let anybody run away from her. If we were going to town, one day my father was driving, and somebody came around, passed her up, and he had a fast horse. And Fanny got her nose right behind that buggy, and they got to town in a hurry. And he came back and introduced himself, and he made some remark about, the fast horse, that nobody could keep up with him, he thought. But Fanny was nervous, and Fanny was a city horse. She wasn't afraid of things in the city, noises that you'd hear there. But if a newspaper blew across the road, or something like that, or we'd run over a dry cornstalk and it would rattle, she'd shy. And you had to watch her because she was nervous. And one peculiarity she had, when you tried to put her in the barn, she would go up to the door and stop. She was afraid to go through the door. And my father thought possibly that a door had closed on her. Maybe that was why her hip was knocked down, that she'd been hurt. Because we'd take a long rope or strap, whatever we were leading her with, and stand in a vacant stall, not hers. And she was the third stall from the door. And we would coax and to get her to come in. And sometimes she'd make a start. She'd think she was going to. She'd get right to the door and she'd stop. One time she did that and reared her head up and bumped her head on the top of the thing. Then she was afraid to come in. But finally she'd get up enough courage and she would come in as fast as she could go, just like a shot, to get in the stall. That was one peculiarity that everybody in the neighborhood knew about. She never got winded. She could run all the way to town. She liked candy. And when we'd go to town, we'd tie her, and I've been trying to remember what we call this weight that you put on the ground when you don't have a hitching post to tie them to. Well, most places, you had hitching posts, place to tie the horse. But in town, we would hook that into her bit. Tyler might not know what a bit is. A bit is in the horse's mouth, and the reins that you're driving her with are attached to it. And that's the way you guide the horse where you want her to go. Go, gosh, I came from Virginia. And so in town we would put this heavy weight down. She couldn't run with that on. But she would be so excited when we came back because she knew she was going to get a piece of candy. She'd get her front paws clear up on the curb. Wait, couldn't wait till you could give her that piece of candy. And we always took them candy on Christmas. They like candy, sugar, good things like that. She was not used to children, but she certainly got used to us kids. We rode her some. We didn't have a saddle, but we rode her bareback. And my younger sister learned to climb on her and get on from the ground. She kind of shimmied up her front leg. I don't know how she ever did it. When I wanted to get on, I pulled her up to a gate or a stump or something high enough that I could get up on her. We used to ride her sometimes when we went after the cows of an evening. And then the last year we were in school, we drove the horse. Now, Grandpa didn't give us the surrey. That wouldn't have been suitable for country. I didn't see any of them. None of the neighbors had surreys with fringe on top. Most of them had storm buggies, the top and then curtain in the front so they could stay dry. Ours was an open buggy. We didn't have a top to it. And my dad fixed it served kind of like a little bench. It was just simply a board with cleats on the end of it that fit over the body of the buggy, right up against the dashboard. Two people could sit in the seat. My mother and father would sit there, and Maxine and I would sit on this little board up in front of the dashboard, and Mother would hold Thelma on her lap. I was 7 years old when we moved there. Did I say that before? Mm-hmm. I was 7 years old when we moved there. I had gone to kindergarten in St. Louis and had started to school in the fall, but we moved school started in September. We moved in November. Got out there about then. And normally, I walked to school. It was 1.25 miles from our house, and most of the time I walked alone because there was no other kids living down that road. But our last year at school, we drove the horse, and nobody else drove the horse, and it's only recently that I realized why we did. My little sister had an accident and had her leg cut, and she had to wear a brace on it. And I think they didn't want her walking that far. So we would drive to school, unhitch her, and turn her loose in the schoolyard. Mm-hmm. She never bothered any of the kids. None of them bothered her. But she was the only horse there. And I never figured that out until just recently, that's why we drove, because we weren't told why. One thing we thought was funny, the horse's name was Fanny, and that was our mother's name. And most of us, now I could talk directly to him. You don't have pets that have the same name that your mother has, but we decided Fanny should be Fanny, and we always called her Fanny. Fanny was used to paved streets, and out in the country, there were no paved roads, and there were no automobiles or motorcycles or things like that. And when they did come, Fanny wasn't afraid of them, and most of the country horses were. You couldn't hold them. They'd get very excited. One thing she didn't like smoke. Well, most horses don't like smoke. But as we went into Lawrence, we crossed the bridge over the Kaw River, and on the other side was the railroad tracks. And once in a while there'd be a train going by about the time we went over the bridge, and then you couldn't hold her. She would turn, she would do anything rather than go through that smoke. But that was understandable. We never blamed her for that. One day I was coming from my girlfriend's house, and Fanny didn't like snakes. Well, we met a snake right in the middle of the road. So I stopped her, but I didn't have a stick. Usually we carried a stick with us. So I thought I would take the buggy whip to the snake. And Fanny, if she didn't have blinders on, if you just leaned forward like you were going to pick up that whip, she'd go now, right now. You weren't going to get that whip out to her. Well, I took the whip out. That didn't bother till I went to hit the snake. I hit it once, and she took off down the road. I was 2 miles from home. I had to walk home. I never got angry at the horse, though. That was a dumb thing for me to have done. And the snake got away, because when I looked at the horse, the snake moved and left. I'm not sure what it was. I think maybe a bull snake. Could have been a rattler, but I don't think so. They look a lot alike, except they don't have rattles. When I had to take the 8th grade examination, it was in the neighboring school district. And this same girlfriend and I went together. We had to go for 3 separate years, and we would pass certain subjects, and then the next year you'd take the exam in different subjects and so on. Well, this was on the 10th of April, and I drove, picked up Grace, and we went to take the exams. She was tied up all day, and it rained, and the rain froze. Before we left, it snowed. The ground was white with snow. And boy, you couldn't hold her till we got in the buggy. So boy had to hold her to keep her so that we had a chance to climb in. And she took us home in a hurry. Well, I stayed all night at Grace's. And then I thought, oh, how's he going to get her in the barn? So when her father came in, I was worried about it, because Grace and I were wet and cold, and oh dear. And I said something about it. He says, I know that horse. He said, I got her in. Everybody knew that horse. Well, anyway, Mrs. Ford had her garden planted, and I can remember seeing those peas and lettuce, radishes, just sticking up through the thin white snow. That was the 8th grade exam, my last one. Did I say the name? Yes, I did. Let me think. The smoke. Snakes. One time, Fanny just about ran away. Didn't know what was the matter with her. She reared her head up, she pawed the air, and then she would go just as fast as she could go. And my father said, I think I know what's the matter with her. I was glad he was along. She got a botfly. A botfly is that gets under their throat, on their throat. And no way can they shake their head and get it off. They can't switch it with their tail. They try to paw with their hand, and evidently it stings a good deal like a bee, because the horses just go wild when they get one. Horseflies are bad enough. Would these kids ever know a horsefly? They're big flies, and they bite the horses, but they can switch their tail and shoo them off most of the time, and they don't, as a rule, get under their throat. In the summer, when it was real hot, we'd feel sorry for Fanny, and we'd get, of course, we curried her, and we brushed her, and we kept her nice. But in the summer when she was hot, we'd get water and the scrub brush, and we'd give her a bath. And she liked that. It cooled her off. We would do that for her. And did you know that if a horse lies down or gets down on the ground, how you could keep it there? You sit on its head. Horse always gets up head first, and if you can't get his head up, he won't get up. Now when I tell you about the cow, it's just the other way around. The cow gets her head down, and the hind legs are the last thing to go down. I always thought that was funny, because one goes up and one goes down. We had 2 work horses. Farmers had to have work horses to do the work on the farm. Fanny never worked. My dad hitched her up to a little plow going to plow the garden one day, and he said it was trying to drive a jackrabbit. She wouldn't stay straight or do anything, but she liked to go in the buggy, and she was all right to ride. Well, the horses were Charlie and John. They were really brothers. They had the same mother, and they were big feet, where Fanny was small and stiff. Well, Charlie was what my father called moon-eyed. There were times of the month he'd go blind, and I remember seeing his eye would turn white looking, and he couldn't see. Well, one day they came home, my father and my uncle, and Charlie had fallen in the well. There was an old house up on our farm, but we were near the road, and this house sat way back on the hill. And it had a good well there. We pumped water for the stock. And it had just a board covering on the top. It was an open well. And that's what Charlie fell in. Well, he was a big, clumsy horse anyway. That's hardly fair. But he was kind of big and clumsy. And they didn't know how to get him out. He fell in tail first. Hind end went down. So he was alive. So they finally managed to get a rope around him behind his front legs. And then they fastened that to a young tree that was near the well. And somehow they used it like a pulley and got him out of the well. And poor old thing, he didn't break any bones. He was skinned up a little bit. And of course he was scared. But my dad was very proud of his horses. And he entered a contest one time. They have picnics, CPA picnics. That was some kind of an organization that the farmers belonged to. Citizens Protective Association or something like that. And they had a pulling contest. So my dad got Charlie and John out there, and they would pull. And they didn't win, but he got a lot of compliments. They were very willing, and they pulled together. Some of them, when they try to get the horses to go, and especially if they would slap the reins or whip them, one would pull and then the other one would pull. They didn't pull together. His horses pulled together. He got a lot of compliments about the horses anyway. He came home very proud of Charlie and John. We lived there for 7 years, so we got very attached to all of the pets. The horses we had the whole while. Some of the others we had for a while, and then, they either died or they didn't, or were sold, or we ate them or something. But the horses we had, and we were extremely attached to them. And when I was ready for high school, we moved back to St. Louis area. And that was one of the things I cried about. I could cry now, just thinking about it, because we thought maybe they wouldn't take care of them, or somebody would. They weren't used to being whipped, and they weren't used, used to anything. Charlie and John got candy on Christmas too. They didn't get it otherwise, but Fanny did. She was a little special. I don't know what happened to her. One thing we always did for the horses after they had performed, maybe Fanny had taken us to town or to the school exams or to school. Whenever we got anywhere, we'd get out, we'd tie her up. We always give her a little special pat, sort of a love pat. And when I was older and got my first car, I called it the donkey, and I would do the same thing. I'd get out and pat the radiator, because sometimes it was hard to start. During our first winter, my grandmother came and stayed with us. She used to come and stay several months at a time. And while she was there, my father went to the other side of Lawrence to buy a cow. He bought a little yellow Jersey cow with a black face, tied her to the back of the buggy, and came home with Fanny. Of course, Fanny was in a hurry. By the time they got home, the poor old cow looked like she couldn't go much farther. My grandmother, who never criticized anybody or anything, whispered to my mother, she says, "I think Morris made a mistake. That cow is so thin." She didn't think she'd be any good. She was small. Most Jerseys are small. And she was going to be fresh in the spring. That means she'd have a calf and start giving milk. And my dad said he hoped we had a heifer calf because it would help us build up the herd more quickly. So we were waiting great expectations for this little calf to arrive. When it did, it was twins, both heifers. So was there ever rejoicing? We didn't know what to name the cow. It was a great thing to decide on names. We finally decided we'd call her Bonnie. And because she was the first cow we had, she was going to be the bell cow. We put the cowbell on her, and then when you turned them loose in the pasture, it was always easier to find them if one of the cows had a bell. And we'd listen for Bonnie's bell when we'd get the cows. And that was one job that we girls had. We'd go up almost every evening with our stick in case we'd meet a snake and bring the cows down to milk. And during the summer, we went up to the old house and pumped water for the cows. We had a big metal tank up there, and a cow can drink a lot of water. But we never minded it, because the cows were pets. We liked them. Well, after we got Bonnie, and she had the two little calves, Bess and Daisy. Bess was mine. Daisy was Maxine's. Daisy was smaller and blacker. I thought my cow was prettier. I think she thought so too. My dad bought two more cows. One was a Guernsey. They are yellow too, and she didn't have the black face like the Jerseys had. And we called her Rose. And the other one we named Belle, and she was a big black and white Holstein. Holsteins give a lot of milk, but they don't have as much cream. They're not as high count of cream. And we liked the Jerseys because it was the cream that we sold. And it was, when you took your cream down, they tested it, and the percentage of cream in the milk determined what you were paid. Well, let's see, Bonnie, Belle, and Rose. That was the three big cows. Then it seemed to me it was the next year. It must have been a little more than a year. I don't think most people don't breed a cow a yearling, do they? Daddy did, but the cow died. Well, anyhow, it wasn't too long till the offspring of the three cows had calves, and that was Blossom, Buttercup, and Clover. and after that we had several others. We were always glad when they had heifers, and most of them seemed like they were. Once in a while, we'd have a little bull calf, and we'd usually sell them. Somebody would want them for breeding, or once in a while we butchered one. Not often, but we did at times have them. After a while, my dad took us to the lot. We were going to learn to milk a cow. I tried, and he gave me the easiest cow in the lot to milk. And I tried, and I tried. I tried milking dry. I tried milking wet, when you wet your hand. About the only thing I could do, if cats came, we had a lot of little cats, they liked that warm milk. And we'd squirt it at them, and they'd open their mouths, and we'd try to hit the cat's mouth. And those cats would sit up on their hind legs and try to catch the milk. Usually it got all over their face, and then they'd have to wash their faces, but we thought that was great fun. Well, it was fun, but I never got enough milk to make any difference. If I had a cup full, I was lucky. My sister, who was 3.5 years younger than I, could get a whole pail full, and she got it so fast it foamed on the top. Well, the result of that was she could milk the cows, and I could wash the milk cans, and the milk buckets, the cream separators, the crocks and jars, and all that stuff. And I thought she had the best of it. Later, when we were teenagers, she thought she got the worst of it. So, well, a cow is just the opposite of a horse. I think I told you that on the other tape. When the cow would lie down, she'd get up with her hind legs first. So you had to keep her hind legs down or else. One day, our cows all had horns, except Bonnie. She didn't have a horn. And my dad decided he was going to have them dehorned. And the man came, I don't think he was a doctor, he just dehorned cows. But we kids, of course, were down washing them. And they were tame, all of them. In fact, my little sister tried to milk those little heifers that hadn't even been bred yet, you know. And you'd think they'd kick her head off, but they didn't. And the man was sawing these horns. Well, it made an awful noise. Some of them, they got bloody, and we kids started to cry because we thought they were hurting the cows. And my father said, that didn't hurt the cow. It's just like when you cut your toenails. You don't feel it, you know. Well, that made us feel better, but we weren't right sure for a while. So then he mentioned a muley cow. He said we'd have old muleys. And I'd never heard of a muley cow. A muley cow is a cow that doesn't have horns. What I don't know now is I thought he meant there was a certain breed that never grew horns. And I haven't found out for sure whether that's true or whether just after it's been dehorned, it's a muley. But anyway, a cow that doesn't have horns is a muley. And the cowboys didn't like to have to handle them because they were hard to lasso. You know, you couldn't get the lasso around their horns. But that's a muley cow. Well, let's see, I wanted to know that. But how are we going? Most of the time when the cows are in the pasture, they're eating. And sometimes, especially if it's hot, they find a shady place. They'll stand in the shade and switch the flies with their tail. Bonnie's tail had a nice curl on her tail curled. But that's what they used their tail for, was to switch the flies. And then when they did that, then they'd chew their cud. It was kind of like they were chewing gum. They regurgitate the grass and the hay or whatever they've eaten, and while they're resting, then they chew it up good. Because a cow has 4 stomachs. And this comes out of the first stomach, and they'll pull it back up in their mouth and chew it, and chew, and chew, perfectly contented in the shade. I said we sold the cream. We didn't sell it all, because we put cream on everything. And we gave the skim milk to the cats and the dogs and the pigs and the chickens and everything. The result is we got fat. That'll do for that. When I was probably about 9 or 10 years old, one day my father surprised me. He came home with some beautiful big white ducks, 6 hens and 2 drakes. The drakes are the papa ducks. And they laid eggs. We saved them. We set them under the ducks, sometimes under the chickens. And I hatched, I don't know how many baby ducks. I had probably 50 or better little ones. Little yellow, they were yellow when they hatched, and little black eyes, but they grew to be great big white ducks. The drakes have a curl on their tail. The hens don't. That's how you could tell them apart. Well, my father fixed me some pins, 2x4s with mesh wire that could be moved, and I put the ducks the little ones in this pin, and put them, move them on the grass. Then when I wanted a clean spot or another place where they did eat, I could just move them. One day I tried to move it with the ducks in there, and the ducks didn't get out of the way, and I smashed a couple. So I learned very quick not to do that. Well, they were all pets, too. Our neighbor, Charlie Jones, had a collie dog. I should have told this story about collie, I guess. But anyway, he was very proud of his dog because he was supposed to be a thoroughbred collie. He was a pretty dog. But he was young, and he came down, and he started chasing my ducks. Well, a big, heavy duck has only 2 legs, and he can't run very well. He wobbles. And he ran those ducks to death, just playing with them. He killed 6 of my 8 ducks. Well, he felt terrible. And my father, I think, gloated just a little bit because he thought our dog wasn't quite a thoroughbred. She was what they figured out 15/16 collie. And they thought their dog was so darn superior. Well, he killed my ducks. So he felt bad about it. He didn't have any ducks. So he asked my father, he said, would the girl be happy with a pig? My father said yes, he thought that would be fine. So he brought me a little all-black pig. Our pigs were red. I'm getting into the pigs. But I could tell mine because she was black. We just let her run loose in the yard. And she was a pet. And when she wanted water, she'd go up the well, and she'd root that pan around. There was a pan there that she could drink out of and make a lot of noise, so you came and pumped her some water. And she liked to play with the horse. She thought she was a dog. And when the dog would run around the horse from one side to the other, and squat down, the pig would do the same thing. She was cute as a button, but she got into all sorts of trouble. And by the pig pen was a peach tree. And I was watching one peach in particular that grew way out on a branch that hung over the pig pen, and was waiting for it to get ripe. And one day I thought it looked like it was ripe, so I tried to climb the tree. Peach trees are brittle, and they break easily, and I was pretty good size that time. And I couldn't quite get out to reach it, but in trying to, I knocked it off, and it fell in the pig pen. And Betsy got it faster than I could. She ate my peach. Well, as she got big, my dad said, we'll have to pen that pig up. She can't run around the yard she's getting pretty good size. So he put her in the pen, and she would go through any fence, under the gate. He put her in the pig house and nailed planks across the front of it. She pushed them out, great big long nails. So he said, well, he couldn't hold her anywhere. He said, we can't have her running around full grown. And he sold her. And I was most unhappy. I didn't even get the money for the pig. That's Betsy. The first animal we had was Fanny, the horse. And then we got Bonnie, the cow. Well, of course, we needed chickens so we could have eggs for breakfast. We had what were called Plymouth Rocks. They're great big, heavy chicken, and they're black and white. They're called barred rocks sometimes. And we had, I think about 24 hens. And we had a rooster. And my dad named him Henry, I think after King Henry VIII, because he had a lot of wives. And one time when Grandpa came out to visit us, he thought we needed another rooster, that the one wasn't enough. So he bought us a beautiful one. He was really pretty. Mark, his bars were just uniform. You couldn't have painted one to look prettier than he was. And he said he named him Sol for Solomon, but Solomon had a lot of wives. Well, the first thing that happened when they got the two roosters, they got in a fight. Roosters always do that. And as they get older, they grow spurs on their legs. Well, Henry and Saul fought and fought and fought. They slashed each other with their spurs. They picked and bit. And when it was over, Saul was bloody, his comb was bleeding. And again, that amused my father, because old Henry held his own against Saul. But, and among all the others, we had one little brown hen. We called her Banty, because she was a bantam chicken. And we could always tell her eggs, because they were smaller than the Plymouth Rock. The Plymouth Rock laid a big egg, and it was a dark-shelled egg. And we thought those were the good kind. But, so, my dad said, no little rooster, though. He didn't want to get the whole flock mixed up. We had purebred Plymouth Rocks. But Banty was a pet. And we would take turns eating her egg at breakfast. I'd have it one morning, then my sister would have it, and then my little sister, when she got old enough to eat eggs. She was only 8 months old when we moved out there. Well, Banty got it in her head that she wanted to come up on the porch and lay her egg. And by the way, I think she laid 364 eggs every year. Just never missed a day, hardly. And she would watch. Our porch was latticed and screened, but she would watch that door until somebody went in or out, and she'd get in there. And she'd get up in the wood box and lay her egg in the wood box. Why, I don't know. But we thought that was funny. But we could pick her up any place, and pet her. She was nice. And my grandmother made biscuits for breakfast, and she didn't like to re-roll the dough. After you cut the round biscuits out, there were always scraps. So she'd kind of roll that into, we called it snakes. Banty's egg and snakes made the best breakfast. That's what we eat for breakfast. Now, I can tell you about more chickens, if you have time. All right. These Plymouth Rock chickens were not the best-natured chickens. When they set some of them would be very nice. You'd reach under to get the eggs from under them, and they'd cluck, 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 and just, you know. But we had others that would pick you like everything, and you'd have to wear gloves because they'd pick so hard they drew blood on our hand. I had them peck me till they did. So they decided we'd get a different kind, so we got Rhode Island Reds. They too are a big, heavy chicken, make good eating chickens, and they lay big, dark eggs. And they were much, much better-natured chickens than the Plymouth Rocks were. The Plymouth Rock chicken, when he hatches, is black. He's all black, and he's got a little yellow spot on the top of his head. And some of those old biddies were so mean, if the chicken spot was bigger than she thought it ought to be, she picked them. And she picked them till they bled. She killed them sometimes. Now, we had some good-natured ones. We'd put quail eggs under them, and they'd hatch them out, you know, and not pay any attention. But those old Plymouth Rock ones weren't going to raise anything but their own, and they had to be uniform. They wouldn't have them. The Rhode Island Reds weren't like that. We had a big incubator that held 360 eggs, and it was heated with a coal oil lamp to keep the temperature the same. And those eggs had to be turned and cooled every day, because that's the way the mother hen does if she's in them. Now, once in a while, a hen would hide her nests out somewhere. We had nests in the chicken house, and we had them down at the barn. But once in a while, they would go out in the pasture or the orchard or somewhere, and we wouldn't know it till they come in with little chicks that would hatch. It takes a chicken 3 weeks to hatch. A duck, it takes 4 weeks to hatch. We'd put the eggs under them, and they would sit on them. Of course, she gets off in the daytime, lets the eggs cool. She turns them just like we did in the other, and in the what do we call it? Incubator. But sometimes another hen will get on the same nest and lay to them. That's what we would call it. So you didn't want that egg under her. So every night when we gathered the eggs, we would look to see. Well, after they've sat on them a while, the eggs get slicky looking, and you could tell it was an old egg. But in case they wouldn't, we marked the eggs with bluing. Bluing is what Mother put in the rinse water when she washed the clothes. And some of them would let us take out the eggs and never bother us, and others would fight us like fury.